Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. Vladimir Putin received in the Kremlin the new Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, who led the overthrow of the regime of Putin's loyal ally Bashar al-Assad. But Putin has to meet with the new Syrian leader because the Russian president is interested in maintaining his military bases in Syria. And, of course, geopolitical influence in the Middle East, which is largely provided by these bases. Ahmed al-Shara himself is also looking for a mutual understanding with Moscow, as he hopes for cooperation with Russia on the issue of rebuilding the country destroyed by the civil war. That is, by and large, Ahmed al-Shara would like the Russians to rebuild what they destroyed themselves. And Moscow does not skimp on generous offers, although it is unclear to what extent these promises can turn into reality. By the way, Ahmed al-Shara was one of the few Arab leaders who were ready to come to Putin for a summit with the leaders of the Arab world, cancelled due to the reluctance of the leading leaders of Arab countries to be present in Moscow against the backdrop of Donald Trump's peacekeeping efforts. But since the summit did not take place, but Shara arrived on his own and spent 2.5 hours with Putin. However, how realistic it is to normalize Russian-Syrian relations remains a big question for now. One of the main demands of the new leadership in Damascus is the extradition of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who fled to Russia after his overthrow with his family and immediate relatives. And of course the question of the responsibility of Assad, who is accused of numerous crimes against humanity in Syria, is one of the main political issues for the Syrian authorities. It is not at all obvious that the Syrians will agree to cooperate with a state that continues to host Bashar al-Assad and ensure his impunity. And here, in a certain sense, we are witnessing a real political impasse. Ahmed al-Shara cannot refuse the demands to extradite Bashar al-Assad to Damascus, and Vladimir Putin cannot agree with this demand. However, to say that Russia's friends have always felt calm after Moscow went to normalize relations with the leaders of the countries from which these imaginary friends fled, I would also be careful. Let's recall, for example, the Azerbaijani pseudo-politicians who were preparing a coup d'état against Haydar Aliyev. After relations between Moscow and Baku were finally normalized, the Kremlin went to extradite the former Prime Minister of Azerbaijan, Shurat Huseynov, who for many years faithfully served the leadership of Azerbaijan to Russian interests in the South Caucasus, and Huseynov, as well as other former leaders of Azerbaijan, had to serve his time for participating in an attempted coup that was clearly sanctioned and organized from the Russian capital. There are many similar examples. There are other examples when no one was given out. But in exact accordance with the Stalinist rule, there is no person, there are no problems. The figure that did not allow the relations between Moscow and the new authorities in a particular country to be finally normalized was simply removed from the chessboard. Well, a heart attack, for example, or a car accident, or a favorite Russian occupation fell out of the window. So I fully assume that Bashar al-Assad will not be extradited for trial in Damascus. Moreover, it is obvious that during this trial, the former Syrian president, can tell a lot of interesting things about Russia's connection with his regime and with the regime of his wonderful daddy. But out of the window, he just might well fall out under completely inexplicable circumstances. Well, for example, nostalgia is a parody. I really want it to be difficult to live in Syria when you don't go out on the streets of your native Damascus every day. Although Bashar's, you didn't go out on such streets in the last years of your life in Syria so as not to face danger and popular love. But nevertheless, explanations of how the Syrian president was in the room and bang. Already on the street somewhere after the confluence, you can find a lot. It is no coincidence that rumors are constantly spreading that Assad was poisoned, that he is in serious condition. I fully admit that there was no poisoning, and there was no serious condition either. But such information stuffing should prepare public opinion for the fact that soon the president of Syria, who fled from his own country under the pressure of the rebellious people, will have an honorable funeral in one of the beautiful Moscow cemeteries. Well, what to do if he was constantly poisoned and generally did not feel the best way? Therefore, of course, Vladimir Putin will not respond positively to Ahmed al-Shara's proposal to extradite Bashar al-Assad and other Damascus butchers in Syria. But he can draw a conclusion. And if he is really interested in Russian military bases in Syria remaining and being able to continue to exist in approximately the same regime in which they existed under the Assad dictatorship, then get rid of Assad. Another option is that Ahmed al-Shara, in connection with the desire to improve relations with Russia and get money to rebuild the country, will have to forget about the former Syrian president and his responsibility to the people. But in this sense, Ahmed al-Shara has a worse situation than Vladimir Putin, because sooner or later, the interim Syrian president will have to go through elections. And if by that time he fails to establish a regime in the country that will control these elections and provide him with a comfortable confirmation of authority for the next decade, as is often the case in Arab countries, then, of course, Ahmed al-Shara and his associates cannot do without Assad. Even falling out of the window may be a more decent option for them than continuing the quiet life of the former Syrian president in the Russian capital. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it. Subscribe to my social networks 4 channels in Patreon, BAME, Coffee and Donatella, which helps to develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature in YouTube itself. Global.